The smell of baked mac and cheese and slow-simmered collard greens still lingered in the warm air of my living room. It was a typical Tuesday evening in our Atlanta home. The Georgia heat had already begun to seep through the window panes, even though it was barely April. I sat in my favorite floral armchair, the one where the fabric on the armrests had worn thin from years of anxious tapping. At 64, my bones weren't as quiet as they used to be. My knees hummed with a dull, familiar ache, a souvenir from 30 years of walking hospital floors as a registered nurse, and the extra night shifts I spent cleaning office buildings to keep a roof over our heads. But looking across the room, every ache felt worth it. Nia, my youngest at 16, was sitting cross-legged on the rug, her fingers clumsily finding chords on a second-hand acoustic guitar. On the sofa, 18-year-old Aaliyah was buried behind a wall of AP biology textbooks, her brow furrowed in that intense way that meant she was aiming for another A+. And out in the driveway, I could hear the rhythmic clinking of wrenches. Marcus, my 20-year-old grandson, was under the hood of his beat-up Honda Civic, trying to coax another 10,000 miles out of it. This was my sanctuary. This was the peace I had built with my bare hands, brick by painful brick. Then the doorbell rang. It wasn't the friendly, rapid tap of a neighbor coming to borrow sugar. It was 3 heavy, authoritative thuds that vibrated through the floorboards. "I'll get it, Nana," Nia called out, setting her guitar down. "No, baby, stay put. I'm up," I said, pushing myself out of the chair. A strange, cold prickle washed over the back of my neck. Call it a mother's intuition, or the residual trauma of a life that had rarely let me rest. But I knew, before my hand even touched the brass doorknob, that the world outside was about to break my door down. I pulled the door open. The porch light illuminated 3 figures. 2 were Atlanta police officers, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. The third was a white woman with a tight, uncompromising bun, wearing a gray pantsuit and a laminated ID badge that read Fulton County Child Protective Services. "Janica Vance?" the woman asked. Her voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. "That's me. Can I help you, officers? Has something happened in the neighborhood?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though my heart had begun a frantic, terrifying drumbeat against my ribs. "Mrs. Vance, my name is Eleanor Higgins with CPS. We received an emergency petition filed at the county courthouse this afternoon," she said, stepping forward so the officers flanked her. "We are here to conduct a welfare check on the minors residing in this home." Aaliyah had come up behind me, peering over my shoulder. "Nana, what's going on?" "Go back to your books, baby. Nana's just talking to these folks," I murmured, my arm automatically shooting backward to shield her. I looked back at the social worker. "A welfare check? Lord have mercy, for what? My grandchildren are well fed, doing their homework, and have clean clothes on their backs. Who on earth called you?" Ms. Higgins looked down at the clipboard in her hands. She didn't look angry. She looked bureaucratic, which was somehow worse. "The petition wasn't filed by a neighbor, Mrs. Vance. It was an emergency writ of habeas corpus and an allegation of child endangerment and parental kidnapping." The words didn't make sense. They floated in the humid air between us like a foreign language. "Kidnapping? I have legal guardianship. I've raised these children for 13 years. Who is accusing me of kidnapping?" Ms. Higgins looked up, her eyes meeting mine. "Their biological mother, Maya Vance Dawson." The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The air left my lungs in a ragged gasp. My knees, already aching, threatened to buckle. Maya. For 13 years, that name had been a ghost in this house, a phantom that we only spoke of in hushed tones when the kids had nightmares. "That's a lie!" Marcus's voice boomed from the porch steps. He had come up from the driveway, his hands still stained with motor oil, his chest heaving. At 20, he was a tall, broad-shouldered young man, his jaw set with a protective fury. "Our mother is dead to us. She walked out. Nana raised us." "Sir, please step back," one of the officers said, a hand drifting closer to his radio. "Marcus, hush now. Don't give them a reason," I ordered, my voice snapping like a whip. He stopped, but his eyes burned holes into the officers. I turned back to the social worker, straightening my spine. I was 64 years old, a black woman in the South. I knew better than to show weakness or anger to the authorities on my front porch. "Ms. Higgins," I said, my voice trembling but loud enough for the neighborhood to hear. "I don't know what lies my daughter has put on that paper, But Maya abandoned these children 13 years ago. I have the guardianship papers in my safe." "Guardianship isn't adoption, Mrs. Vance," Ms. Higgins said clinically. "The biological mother is claiming you alienated the children from her, withheld contact, and that you are currently unfit to care for the minors due to declining mental health." Declining mental health? The sheer audacity of the lie made my blood boil. "I have a right to interview the minors," Ms. Higgins continued, "separately." For the next 2 hours, my home turned into an interrogation room. I sat on the porch with the officers while Ms. Higgins spoke to Aaliyah and Nia in the kitchen. Every minute felt like drowning. I could see Marcus pacing the lawn, his fists clenched. When the social worker finally emerged, she looked slightly less stern, but still entirely professional. "The girls appear healthy and report no abuse," Ms. Higgins said, writing furiously on her clipboard. "However, given the severe allegations of parental kidnapping and elder cognitive decline filed by Mrs. Dawson, this is an open investigation. You will be served with a formal summons to family court within the week. Do not attempt to leave the state." When their squad cars finally pulled away, the taillights disappearing into the Atlanta night, the silence they left behind was deafening. My 3 grandchildren gathered around me in the living room. Nia was crying silently, her tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks. Aaliyah looked terrified. Marcus looked ready to go to war. "Nana," Aaliyah whispered, her voice breaking, "is she going to take us?" I pulled all 3 of them into my arms, burying my face in Nia's hair, smelling the coconut oil she used. "Over my dead body," I promised them. "Over my dead body." Later that night, long after I had tucked the girls in and convinced Marcus to try and get some sleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was finally quiet, save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. I poured myself a mug of chamomile tea, but my hands were shaking so badly it rattled against the saucer. I looked at the framed photographs lining the hallway. Marcus at his high school graduation, Aaliyah holding her first-place trophy from the debate team, Nia missing her 2 front teeth, smiling brightly in her Sunday best. And then I closed my eyes, and the memories I had tried to bury for over a decade came clawing their way to the surface. It was November 13 years ago. A bitter, unusual freeze had descended on Georgia, the kind of wet, bone-chilling cold that the South never knew quite how to handle. I had just come home from a 12-hour shift at Grady Memorial Hospital. My feet were swollen, and all I wanted was a hot bath and my bed. The knock on the door that night was frantic, desperate. When I opened it, the icy wind whipped into the hallway, bringing with it the smell of cheap cigarettes, stale rain, and despair. Standing there was my daughter, Maya. She was 25 but looked 40. Her collarbones jutted out sharply against her thin sweater. Her eyes were hollow and bruised underneath, and her pupils were pinpoint tiny, the unmistakable signature of the opioids that had been hollowing her out for 2 years. Clinging to her legs were 3 shivering children. Marcus was 7, wearing a jacket 2 sizes too small. Aaliyah was 5, her hair uncombed and matted. And little Nia, barely 3, was crying, a wet, rattling cough shaking her tiny chest. They were filthy. They smelled of unwashed clothes and sour milk. "Mama," Maya had croaked, her voice trembling. She didn't look me in the eye. She couldn't. "Maya? Good Lord, get these babies out of the cold," I said, rushing forward to pull them inside. But Maya didn't step over the threshold. She stayed on the porch, her hands shoved deep into her pockets. "I can't stay, Mama. I got a ride waiting. I just need you to watch them. Just for a week. Just until I get my head straight. Tyrone said we can't take 'em where we're going." Tyrone, a man she had met at a gas station 3 months prior. A man with a rap sheet longer than my grocery list. "You're leaving your children here so you can run off with some man while you're high out of your mind?" I yelled, the anger burning through my exhaustion. "Look at them, Maya. They're freezing. They're starving." "I'll be back, Mama. I swear to God, just give me a week to get on my feet," she had screamed back, tears mixing with the mascara smeared down her face. Before I could grab her arm, she turned and sprinted down the driveway, disappearing into the passenger side of a rusted sedan that had been idling by the curb. The tires screeched against the wet pavement, and she was gone. I stood in the open doorway, the freezing rain blowing against my face, looking down at my 3 grandchildren. Marcus looked up at me, his 7-year-old eyes holding a sorrow that no child should ever know. He reached out and took Aaliyah's hand, then pulled Nia close to his side, trying to protect them from a world that had just thrown them away. "Nana," Marcus had whispered, his teeth chattering. "Is Mommy coming back?" That night I bathed them. The water ran gray with dirt. I made them chicken noodle soup from a can, watching as they ate like they hadn't seen a warm meal in days. I held Nia upright against my chest all night so she could breathe through her asthma attack. A week passed, then a month, then a year. The phone never rang. There was no Christmas card, no birthday call, no dollar bill sent in the mail. Maya vanished into the opioid epidemic that was swallowing a generation whole. Rumors reached me through church folks that she had officially married Tyrone, that they were drifting from motel to motel in Florida, chasing the next high. I didn't have time to mourn the daughter I had lost, because I was too busy saving the children she had left behind. I was 51 years old. I was supposed to be planning my retirement, maybe saving up for a trip to see the Grand Canyon. Instead, I went back to the hospital and begged for overtime. When that wasn't enough to cover the groceries, the school supplies, the inhalers for Nia, and the therapy Marcus desperately needed to process his anger, I took a job cleaning a corporate law office downtown from midnight to 4 a.m. For 13 years, my life was a relentless cycle of work, cooking, helping with homework, and praying. I traded my peace of mind for their futures. I sat in the bleachers at every soccer game, clapped the loudest at every spelling bee, and held them through every fever and every heartbreak. I didn't just babysit them. I became their mother. And now, 13 years later, Maya had returned from the dead. Not with an apology, not with remorse, but with a lawyer and a lie, trying to rip my heart out of my chest. The morning after CPS showed up, I didn't go to work. I put on my best church suit, a navy blue skirt and a tailored jacket, pinned my hair back flawlessly, and drove downtown. If my daughter had found a lawyer, I needed one too. But my savings account held exactly $1,420, barely enough to cover a month's mortgage, let alone a retainer for a fancy downtown law firm. So I drove to the Atlanta Legal Aid Society. The waiting room smelled of stale coffee, industrial carpet cleaner, and sheer desperation. It was packed with people who looked just like me, folks whose lives had been upended by systems they didn't understand and couldn't afford to fight. Mothers fighting evictions, grandfathers fighting for disability checks. I took a number and sat on a hard plastic chair for 4 hours, my hands tightly gripping the handles of my worn leather purse. Finally, a voice called out, "Mrs. Vance? Janica Vance?" I stood up and followed the receptionist into a small, cramped office at the back of the building. Sitting behind a desk piled high with manila folders was a young man. He looked no older than 30, wearing a slightly wrinkled dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, a tie loosened around his neck. His nameplate read, David Chen, staff attorney. He looked exhausted, but when he looked up at me, his eyes were sharp and attentive. "Mrs. Vance, please have a seat," David said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I understand you're facing an emergency custody petition and a CPS investigation?" "That's right, Mr. Chen," I said, sitting down and keeping my back completely straight. "My daughter Maya abandoned her 3 children on my porch 13 years ago. Now she's back, accusing me of kidnapping them and telling the county I've lost my mind." David's eyebrows furrowed. He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him. 13 years is a massive gap for a parent to suddenly file an emergency writ of habeas corpus. "Do you have a copy of the petition the social worker served you?" I reached into my purse, pulled out the folded, terrifying document Ms. Higgins had left on my kitchen table, and handed it to him. David put on a pair of wire-rimmed glasses and began to read. For the first 2 minutes, the room was silent except for the rustle of the paper. Then I watched as his expression shifted. The polite, tired demeanor of a public defender vanished, replaced by the narrowed, calculating gaze of a litigator who had just spotted a trap on the battlefield. He flipped to the last page, then back to the first. He looked at the court stamp, then at the signature line. "Mrs. Vance," David said slowly, taking off his glasses and looking at me. "Has your daughter historically had money? A good job? Assets?" I let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Maya? The last time I saw her, she stole $40 out of my purse to buy pills. As far as I know, she's been married to a man who can't hold a job and they live hand to mouth. Why?" David turned the petition around and slid it across the desk toward me. He tapped a manicured finger on the letterhead printed at the top corner of the document. "Because this petition wasn't filed by a pro bono clinic. It wasn't written by someone representing themselves. "This was drafted and filed by Sterling, Vance, and Howell," David said, his voice lowering to a serious register. "Is that a bad thing?" I asked, my stomach nodding. "They are one of the most expensive, aggressive family law firms in Buckhead," David explained, leaning forward. "They charge a $500 consultation fee just to walk through their doors and a minimum $20,000 retainer to take a case to court. They don't do charity." I stared at the black ink on the page, the letters suddenly looking like venomous spiders. "I don't understand. Maya doesn't have $20,000. She doesn't have $20. How could she hire a firm like that?" David's dark eyes met mine. There was a profound, sad understanding in them. "Lawyers like that only take cases on contingency, meaning they only get paid if they win, if there is a massive payout at the end of the line. A pot of gold waiting to be claimed." He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "Mrs. Vance, people who have been absent for 13 years don't suddenly wake up and hire sharks to get their kids back out of the goodness of their hearts. Maya isn't here for her children." A cold dread began to pool in my stomach, freezing the blood in my veins. "Then what is she here for?" David looked down at his notes. "I don't know yet, but tell me about the children's biological father. Is he in the picture? Did he leave them anything?" "DeAndre?" I whispered, my mind racing. "DeAndre died in a scaffolding collapse at a construction site when Nia was just a baby. That was what sent Maya off the deep end in the first place." David sat up straight, his eyes widening slightly. "A construction collapse? Was there a wrongful death lawsuit? A settlement?" The memory hit me with the force of a freight train. Years ago, before Maya disappeared, there had been talk of a lawsuit against the construction company. But Maya was so deep into her addiction she never showed up to the hearings. A court-appointed guardian ad litem had taken over to protect the children's interests, placing the settlement into a blind trust. I had never touched it, never even thought about it, because we survived on my sweat and tears. I only knew that the money existed, locked away until the children were of legal age. "Yes," I breathed, the realization making me physically nauseous. "There was a trust fund established for the kids. I don't even know how much is in it. But Marcus turns 21 in 2 months. That's when the first portion of the trust unlocks." David let out a slow, heavy exhale, tossing his pen onto the desk. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. "There it is," David said quietly. "Your daughter didn't come back to be a mother, Mrs. Vance. She came back because in 2 months, Marcus is going to be sitting on a fortune. And as his biological mother, if she can prove you are unfit, if she can get custody and financial conservatorship over those kids..." He didn't have to finish the sentence. The math was horrifyingly simple. Maya hadn't come back to love them. She had come back to rob them. And she was willing to destroy my life, send me to jail, and rip my family apart to get her hands on that money. I looked at my worn hands, the calluses built from scrubbing floors to buy those kids winter coats. I thought about the fear in Aaliyah's eyes last night. I thought about Maya, somewhere in this city, plotting with high-priced lawyers to steal the future her children had suffered so much to reach. The fear that had gripped me since the knock on the door began to evaporate. In its place, a slow, burning, righteous fury ignited in my chest. A mother's fury, a grandmother's war cry. I looked across the desk at David Chen. "Mr. Chen," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady timbre that brooked no argument. "I don't care what kind of fancy lawyers she has. I don't care what lies she tells the court. Maya walked out on us in the freezing rain, and I built a fire to keep my babies warm. She is not taking them from me." David smiled, a sharp, hungry smile of a lawyer ready for a fight. "Then we better get to work, Mrs. Vance, because the storm is already here." 3 days after my meeting at Legal Aid, my phone rang. It was David Chen. His voice, usually calm and measured, carried a sharp edge of urgency. "Mrs. Vance, I need you to come down to the office. I pulled the probate records on DeAndre's estate. You need to see this in person." When I arrived, David didn't bother with pleasantries. He had a thick stack of manila folders spread across his desk, the fluorescent light bouncing off pages of dense legal jargon. He gestured for me to sit down. "I told you Sterling, Vance, and Howell wouldn't get out of bed for a standard child custody dispute," David began, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the desk. I dug into the wrongful death suit involving the children's father. I assumed it was a standard workers' compensation payout. It wasn't. I frowned, adjusting my purse on my lap. DeAndre was a good man, but he was just a scaffolding rigger, Mr. Chen. We always assumed the company settled for enough to cover a college fund. The company didn't just settle, Mrs. Vance. They were found grossly negligent. They had ignored safety citations for months before that scaffolding collapsed, David explained, sliding a document toward me. The court-appointed guardian ad litem secured a structured settlement for the 3 minors. It was placed into an ironclad trust, entirely shielded from Maya because of her documented substance abuse at the time. He paused, letting the silence stretch for a moment. The trust isn't $50,000, Mrs. Vance. It's $1.5 million. The room spun. The air in my lungs turned to lead. $1 million? $500,000 for each child, David confirmed quietly, with compounding interest over 13 years. Marcus's portion unlocks the day he turns 21. Aaliyah and Nia's portions follow when they come of age. But, and this is the crucial part, until they turn 25, the funds must be overseen by a legally appointed financial conservator. Right now, that's you. I stared at the numbers printed on the page. Too many zeros. It was blood money. Money paid for a father who would never get to walk his daughters down the aisle or teach his son how to shave. If Maya wins custody and proves you are an unfit guardian, David said, tracing a line on the paper with his pen, she doesn't just get the kids. She automatically becomes the conservator of $1.5 million trust. She can charge living expenses, administrative fees, and housing costs directly to the estate. She could drain it completely legally before Nia even graduates high school. A sick, twisting feeling settled in my gut. My daughter wasn't just trying to steal my family. She was trying to steal their future to fund whatever destructive life she had built with Tyrone. What do we do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, but my jaw set like stone. We brace for impact, David said grimly. Because a firm like Sterling is going to play dirty. They have to prove you're unfit, and they will try to break you down to do it. David was right. The storm didn't just break. It tore through my life with a calculated, vicious precision. It started with the phone calls. I was in the kitchen, chopping bell peppers for dinner, when my cell phone buzzed on the counter. It was an unknown number. I wiped my hands on my apron and answered. Hello? Mom. The voice was softer than I remembered, stripped of the manic, drug-fueled edge it had 13 years ago, but it still sent a shiver down my spine. Maya, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. Mom, please just listen to me, she said. She sounded rehearsed, like an actress reading lines from a script. You're getting old. Raising teenagers is too much for you. You don't have to fight this. Let me help you. You've been so confused lately, I just want to take the burden off your shoulders. Confused? I snapped, the audacity of the word lighting a fire in my chest. The only thing I'm confused about is how you sleep at night. You don't care about these kids. You care about DeAndre's money. There was a pause on the line. When she spoke again, the soft, victimized tone was gone, replaced by a cold, metallic threat. I'm their mother, Janica. The law is on my side. Don't make me humiliate you in court. You're sick. You know you're sick. Give them to me before you embarrass yourself. She hung up before I could reply. I stood in the kitchen, my heart pounding, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. You're sick. You know you're sick. What on earth was she talking about? I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next afternoon, Aaliyah came slamming through the front door, her backpack hitting the floor with a heavy thud. She was practically vibrating with anger, her eyes red-rimmed. Nana, look at this, she demanded, shoving her smartphone into my hands. It was Facebook. Maya had created a public page titled Reunite a Mother's Heart. There was a heavily filtered recent photo of Maya, looking tragic and put together, wearing a modest cardigan. Beneath it was a long, agonizing post. For 13 years, my heart has been bleeding. I made mistakes as a young, grieving widow, and my mother took advantage of my vulnerability to steal my babies. Now, as she suffers from cognitive decline, she is holding them hostage out of spite, alienating them from the mother who loves them. Please pray for my family as I fight the hardest legal battle of my life to bring my children home to a safe, sane environment. The post had hundreds of shares. Strangers in the comments were calling me a monster, a kidnapper, a toxic narcissist. People who didn't know the smell of Nia's asthma medicine or the sound of Marcus's nightmares were judging me based on the lies of a woman who hadn't bought them a single pair of socks in over a decade. She's psycho, Aaliyah choked out, swiping at a tear angrily. Kids at school are seeing this, Nana. They're asking me why you kidnapped us. I pulled Aaliyah into my chest, stroking her braids. Shh, let them talk, baby. The truth doesn't need a Facebook page. We know who we are. But despite my brave face, the psychological warfare was taking its toll. I wasn't sleeping. I was constantly checking the locks on the doors. Every time a strange car drove slowly past our house, my chest tightened. Maya was trying to gaslight me, trying to make me feel isolated and crazy. And then she made her move. It was a rainy Thursday. I had just walked out of the CVS pharmacy, holding a plastic bag with Nia's prescription refills. As I unlocked my car, a man in a beige windbreaker stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. "Janica Vance?" he asked. "Yes?" He shoved a thick, legal-sized envelope against my chest. "You've been served." He turned and walked away before I could even process what had happened. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, the rain drumming a frantic beat against the windshield, and tore the envelope open. It was an ex parte motion for emergency custody. My eyes scanned the dense legal text, my heart dropping into my stomach. An ex parte motion meant Maya's lawyers were asking a judge to grant her immediate temporary custody of Nia and Aaliyah, without me even having the chance to defend myself in court. It was a legal ambush reserved for situations where children were in immediate, life-threatening danger. I flipped to the attached exhibits, the evidence they were using to justify this extreme measure. And there it was. Exhibit B, a medical record from the Emory Senior Cognitive Clinic, dated 14 months ago. The breath caught in my throat. 14 months ago, I had been working 60 hours a week. I was exhausted, stressed, and I had misplaced my car keys a few times. I had forgotten to turn off the stove one evening. Terrified that I was failing the kids, I had gone to a free clinic for a memory screening. The doctor had told me I was perfectly fine, just suffering from severe burnout and sleep deprivation. He had recommended vitamins and rest. But Sterling, Vance, and Howell had gotten a hold of the intake form, likely through Maya accessing old insurance portals, and they had twisted it. The motion didn't mention my clean bill of health. It only highlighted my self-reported symptoms. Patient reports confusion, leaving stove on, misplacing items. The legal brief attached to it was ruthless. It painted a picture of a 64-year-old woman descending into advanced dementia, living in a hazardous home, incapable of administering medication to a minor with asthma. Maya was claiming that if the girls weren't removed immediately, their lives were in danger. If a judge read this one-sided fabricated horror story, they could sign the order today. The police could be at my door tonight to take my girls away. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I threw the car into gear and drove home faster than the law allowed, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I burst through the front door. "Marcus, Aaliyah!" They came running out of the kitchen, taking one look at my face and knowing something was terribly wrong. I was shaking as I dialed David Chen's number on speakerphone. He picked up on the second ring. "David, they served me," I gasped, pacing the living room. "An emergency motion. They're saying I have dementia. They used that clinic visit from last year. They want to take the girls tonight." I heard David swear under his breath, a sharp, uncharacteristic sound. "It's a dirty trick. They filed it late in the day, hoping a fatigued judge will just rubber stamp it to be safe. Janica, listen to me. I need medical proof that you are sound of mind, and I need it right now. If I can't file an emergency countermotion with evidence before the courthouse closes in 2 hours, the judge might sign it." "How?" I cried, tears of frustration finally spilling over. "My primary care doctor is out of town. I can't get a neurological evaluation in 2 hours." The room fell dead silent. I looked at my grandchildren. For 13 years, I had been their shield. But looking at them now, I realized they weren't little children huddled on a freezing porch anymore. They were young adults, forged in the fire of our survival. Marcus stepped forward. He took the phone from my trembling hand. "Mr. Chen, this is Marcus." "Marcus, I know what you need," Marcus interrupted, his voice deep, steady, and carrying an authority that made him look exactly like his father. "You need proof my Nana isn't losing her mind. Will a sworn video affidavit work? If it's compelling enough, and signed under penalty of perjury, it might give the judge enough pause to deny the emergency order and force a full hearing," David said. "Give me 30 minutes, Marcus said and hung up. He turned to Aaliyah. "Grab your ring light and your phone. Set it up on the dining table. Nia, go get the lockbox with the household budget and your medical files." "Marcus, what are you doing?" I asked, wiping my face. "We're going to war, Nana," he said gently, guiding me to the chair at the head of the dining table. "She thinks she can paint you as a helpless old woman? We're going to show the judge exactly who runs this house." For the next 20 minutes, my dining room turned into a deposition chamber. Aaliyah hit record on her phone. Marcus stood behind the camera, holding a legal pad. "State your name and date of birth for the record," Marcus said, his voice professional. "Janica Louise Vance, October 12, 1961, I replied, sitting perfectly straight, my hands folded on the table. "Nana, Maya Dawson claims you are suffering from severe cognitive decline," Marcus continued. "Can you tell the court the exact breakdown of our household budget for this month?" I didn't even blink. "Mortgage is $840, due on the 1st. The electric bill was $112 this month because we ran the AC, paid on the 15th. Nia's albuterol inhalers cost $45 with the Legal Aid Pharmacy discount card, picked up today at 2 p.m. We have $300 allocated for groceries, and I currently have $1,420 in my savings account." "She claims you are incapable of managing medical care," Marcus pushed. "What is Nia's exact asthma protocol?" "2 puffs of albuterol as a rescue inhaler during an attack," I fired back, my voice gaining strength with every word. "1 puff of Flovent every morning and night as a preventative. If her peak flow meter drops below 200, we drive straight to Grady Memorial ER, not the urgent care, because the urgent care doesn't have a pediatric respiratory specialist on call." Marcus nodded, stepping into the frame. He looked directly into the camera. "My name is Marcus Vance. I am 20 years old. I am a junior at Georgia State University." The woman sitting behind me did not lose her mind. She sacrificed it, piece by piece, working night shifts to keep us alive after the woman who gave birth to us abandoned us in the dead of winter. Nana manages our finances, our health, and our futures with more clarity than Maya Dawson has ever had in her entire life. If you sign an order taking my sisters away from the only mother we have ever known, you are not protecting children. You are aiding and abetting a kidnapper. Aaliyah stopped the recording. She was crying, but she had a fierce, defiant smile on her face. She uploaded the video to a secure drive and emailed it directly to David Chen, along with scans of my perfectly balanced checkbook and Nia's meticulously kept medical log. The next hour was the longest of my life. We sat in the living room, holding hands in silence, watching the clock tick closer to 5 p.m. when the courthouse would close. If the phone didn't ring, the police could arrive at any moment. At 4:52 p.m., my phone buzzed. I hit speakerphone. "Mrs. Vance?" David's voice came through, sounding out of breath but triumphant. "I got the video. I ran it straight to the judge's chambers. He watched it." "And?" I asked, my heart stopping. "He threw Maya's motion out," David said, a grin evident in his voice. "He denied the emergency removal. He said if Sterling, Vance, and Howell try to file another ex parte motion with misleading medical records, he'll sanction the firm." A collective, shuddering sigh of relief went through the room. Nia buried her face in my shoulder, sobbing. Marcus squeezed my hand. "However," David's tone sobered, reminding us that the battle was far from over. "The judge has scheduled the main custody and conservatorship trial for exactly 1 month from today. Maya's lawyers are going to be furious that their ambush failed. In that courtroom, they aren't going to rely on fake medical records. They are going to attack your character, your income, and everything you've ever done. We won the skirmish, Janica, but the war is about to begin." I looked around my living room, at the worn furniture, the textbooks, the guitar, at the 3 beautiful, strong children who had just fought to protect me the same way I had always protected them. "Let them come, David," I said, my voice steady, anchored by the love of the family I had built. "I've been fighting for these kids for 13 years. I'm not about to stop now." The Fulton County Family Court building was a looming structure of cold marble and unforgiving fluorescent lights. It smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of anxious sweat. For 13 years, I had scrubbed floors in buildings just like this one, rendering myself invisible so my grandchildren could have a future. But today, I wasn't wearing a janitor's uniform. I wore my Sunday best, my spine steel straight, walking through those heavy oak doors not as a worker, but as a mother going to war. I sat at the defendant's table next to David Chen. Behind me, in the gallery, sat Marcus and Aaliyah. I had insisted Nia stay at school. She was too young to hear the poison that was about to be spilled in this room. Across the aisle sat Maya, Seeing her in the harsh light of the courtroom took my breath away for a fraction of a second. She didn't look like the skeletal, desperate addict who had vanished into the freezing rain all those years ago. She wore a demure, pastel pink dress, her hair blown out into soft curls. She wore minimal makeup, just enough to highlight the perfectly timed, tragic tears brimming in her eyes. She was playing the part of the reformed, grieving mother to absolute perfection. Beside her was Tyrone, looking deeply uncomfortable in a suit that pulled too tight across his shoulders. And flanking them was Arthur Sterling, a silver-haired $1,000-an-hour shark in a bespoke Italian suit. He looked at David Chen, my tired legal aid lawyer with his off-the-rack jacket, with a smirk of absolute disdain. Judge Theodore Mason, a stern man with 30 years on the bench, struck his gavel. Court is in session. We are here to hear the petition for a modification of custody and conservatorship, filed by the biological mother, Maya Vance Dawson. Mr. Sterling stood up first. His voice was smooth, practiced, and dripping with manufactured empathy. Your Honor, Sterling began, pacing slowly. This is a story of a tragic misunderstanding. 13 years ago, my client was a young, grieving widow suffering from severe, undiagnosed postpartum depression. Seeking help, she temporarily left her children in the care of her mother, Janica Vance. But when my client recovered, when she finally got on her feet and reached out, the door was slammed in her face. I gripped the edge of the wooden table so hard my fingernails dug into the grain. Liar. For over a decade, Sterling continued, his voice rising in faux indignation, Mrs. Vance has engaged in a textbook case of grandparent alienation syndrome. She changed her phone number. She moved. She poisoned these children's minds against their biological mother, while slowly succumbing to the cognitive decline of her own advanced age. My client is clean, married, and owns a home. She is simply asking this court to right a 13-year wrong and return her children and the management of their rightful estate to her. When Maya took the stand, it was a masterclass in manipulation. She cried softly, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She talked about how much she missed her babies, how she had an empty bedroom waiting for them, how she had supposedly sent letters that I had maliciously intercepted and burned. I just want to be a mother again, Maya choked out, looking pleadingly at the judge. My mom, she just couldn't let go. She wanted them for herself. I was so scared of her, Your Honor. I didn't react. I didn't shake my head or scoff. I sat perfectly still, radiating a cold, quiet dignity. I let her dig her own grave. Then Sterling called Tyrone to the stand to establish the stable household waiting for my grandchildren. Tyrone shuffled up, taking the oath. He testified that he had a steady part-time job driving a delivery truck, that he had been clean for 10 years, and that he fully supported his wife taking her children back. No further questions, Sterling said smugly, returning to his seat. David Chen stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, picked up his yellow legal pad, and walked toward the witness stand. He didn't look intimidated by Sterling's expensive suit. He looked like a man holding a lit match in a room full of gasoline. Mr. Dawson, David said, his voice polite but incredibly sharp. You testified that you have a stable home ready for these teenagers. A 3-bedroom house in Decatur, correct? Yes, sir, Tyrone nodded. And you work part-time as a driver, making roughly $22,000 a year? Tyrone shifted uncomfortably. Yes, but Maya's looking for work too. I see, David said, pulling a document from his folder. Mr. Dawson, are you aware that exactly 14 days ago, the bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on that 3-bedroom house due to 6 months of unpaid mortgage? Sterling shot up. Objection. Relevance. It goes directly to the petitioner's claim of providing a stable home, Your Honor, David countered smoothly. Overruled. The witness will answer, Judge Mason said, peering over his glasses. Tyrone swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. We hit a rough patch, but Maya said we were coming into some money soon. She said we'd get retroactive child support from her mom, and that we'd have the kids' living expenses covered by the state once we got custody. David stopped pacing. He turned slowly, looking directly at Tyrone. Did your wife tell you she was going to use state welfare to save your house, Mr. Dawson? Objection, Sterling barked. Withdrawn, David said quickly. He took 2 steps closer to the stand. Mr. Dawson, what exactly did your wife tell you about her mother, Janica Vance? She told me her mom kidnapped the kids, Tyrone said, looking defensively at Maya. She said her mom forged papers to keep them, and that we were just coming here to get justice, to get our family back. David tilted his head. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Justice, I see. Mr. Dawson, did your wife ever mention a man named DeAndre? The children's late father? Tyrone frowned, clearly confused. She mentioned him once, said he died a long time ago. Why? David didn't look at Tyrone. He looked dead at Maya. Did she happen to mention that DeAndre's wrongful death lawsuit resulted in a structured trust fund for these 3 children? A trust fund that currently holds $1.5 million? And that the biological parent who gains custody automatically gains conservatorship over that cash? The color instantly drained from Tyrone's face. He blinked, once, twice. His eyes darted from David Chen to the judge and finally rested on his wife. 1 point? What? Tyrone stammered, his voice cracking. $1.5 million, Mr. Dawson, David repeated clearly. Did your wife tell you that her sudden maternal awakening perfectly coincided with the exact month that the oldest child, Marcus, is set to inherit a $500,000 payout? Objection! Counsel is testifying, Sterling yelled, his face turning red. But it was too late. The bomb had detonated. Tyrone gripped the edges of the witness box, his knuckles turning white. He stared at Maya, the betrayal washing over his features in real time. He wasn't a saint, but he realized in that exact second that he was nothing but a pawn. Maya had lied to him. She had dragged him into court, risking perjury, to help her steal a fortune she had kept completely secret from him. You lied to me, Tyrone whispered into the microphone, the sound echoing through the courtroom. He pointed a shaking finger at Maya. You told me we were fighting for your babies. You didn't say nothing about $1 million, Maya. You told me we were going to lose the house if we didn't do this. Tyrone, shut up, Maya shrieked, dropping her demure act completely. Judge Mason slammed his gavel repeatedly. Order! Order in my courtroom! Tyrone stood up from the witness stand, his chest heaving. I'm done. I ain't going to jail for fraud for you, Maya. I'm done. He pushed past the bailiff, shoved the heavy oak doors open, and walked out of the courtroom. Sterling was scrambling, whispering furiously to Maya, whose face was now twisted in a mask of panic and rage. The polished veneer was completely shattered. Your Honor, Sterling said, trying to salvage the wreckage. My client's husband is clearly confused. However, the financial assets of the children are irrelevant to the core issue. The core issue is that Maya Dawson is the biological mother. Mrs. Vance has no legal adoption papers, only a temporary guardianship granted by default. Maya never legally relinquished her rights. Any handwritten notes Mrs. Vance possesses claiming Maya abandoned them were written under the duress of addiction and hold absolutely zero legal weight. David Chen walked calmly back to our table. He looked down at me, offering a microscopic, reassuring nod. Your Honor, David said, addressing the bench, counsel is correct. Handwritten notes written under duress are not legally binding, which is why the defense calls our final witness, Patricia Henderson. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. An older, dignified black woman with silver hair, wearing a sharp gray suit, walked down the aisle. Maya's head whipped around. For a second she looked confused. Then a look of pure, unadulterated terror washed over her face. Patricia Henderson took the stand and was sworn in. Mrs. Henderson, can you please state your previous occupation for the record? David asked. I was a senior caseworker for the Georgia Department of Family and Children's Services for 35 years, she replied with a clear, authoritative voice. I retired 4 years ago. Did you interact with the petitioner, Maya Vance, 13 years ago? I did, Mrs. Henderson said, looking at Maya with a gaze that could freeze boiling water. In November of that year, she came into my county office requesting emergency cash assistance and food stamps. And what did you tell her? David asked, approaching the stand with a document in his hand. I informed her that because she had physically abandoned her children at her mother's residence the week prior, she was not the primary caregiver and therefore ineligible to claim them as dependents to receive state benefits, Mrs. Henderson stated. David held up the piece of paper. Your Honor, I would like to enter Exhibit D into evidence. He handed a copy to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge, and then dropped a copy squarely in front of Arthur Sterling. Sterling picked it up. I watched the color drain from the expensive lawyer's face. He looked at Maya as if she were a rabid animal he had just discovered in his briefcase. Mrs. Henderson, David said, his voice echoing in the absolute silence of the room. Can you read to the court what Exhibit D is? "It is a state of Georgia voluntary relinquishment of parental rights form," Mrs. Henderson read. It states, "I, Maya Vance, being of sound mind and not under immediate duress, do hereby permanently, voluntarily, and irrevocably surrender all parental rights, claims, and physical custody of my 3 minor children to Janica Vance." And is it signed? It is signed by Maya Vance, and it is countersigned and stamped by myself, a licensed notary public for the state of Georgia. David leaned against the jury box. "Mrs. Henderson, Sterling claims his client was insane with grief and addiction. Why would she sign such a permanent, devastating document?" Mrs. Henderson's expression hardened into pure disgust. "Because at the time, the state was running a pilot program offering a one-time $500 emergency relocation grant for single individuals. She wanted the cash, but to get it as a single adult, she had to prove she had no dependents. So she signed her children away." The courtroom collectively stopped breathing. "Let the record reflect," David said, his voice quiet but echoing like thunder, "that Maya Dawson did not lose her children to a kidnapping grandmother. She sold them for $500. Maya burst into hysterical sobs. "It's a lie. I didn't know what I was signing. I was high." "You passed a mandatory cognitive sobriety check administered by a state worker before the notary stamp was applied," David fired back instantly. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You traded 3 human lives for $500, and now you have the audacity to walk into this court and demand $1.5 million. "No further questions," David said in disgust, turning his back on her. Sterling didn't even stand up to cross-examine. He was packing his expensive leather briefcase. He knew a lost cause and a malpractice suit waiting to happen when he saw one. Judge Mason took off his glasses. He pinched the bridge of his nose, his face dark with a judicial rage I had never seen before. He looked down at Maya, who was weeping with her head on the table. Before the judge could speak, Marcus stood up from the gallery. "Your Honor, may I speak?" "Strictly speaking, it is highly irregular," Judge Mason said gently. "But given the circumstances, son, I will allow it." Marcus walked to the wooden partition separating the gallery from the court. He didn't look at Maya. He looked only at the judge. "My name is Marcus Vance. In 2 months, I will be 21. I understand there is money waiting for me. Money my biological father left because he died. But I want this court to know that I am already the richest man in Atlanta." Marcus turned his head, his dark eyes meeting mine. Tears streamed down his face, but his voice never wavered. "Because for 13 years I watched the woman sitting at that table, my Nana, work until her hands bled. She cleaned toilets so I could buy my first suit for a college interview. She went hungry so my sisters could have asthma medicine. The woman crying at the plaintiff's table sold us for $500 to go get high. But Janica Vance bought us back with 13 years of her blood, sweat, and absolute unconditional love. Do whatever you have to do with the money, Your Honor. But don't you dare insult us by calling that woman our mother. Nana is our mother." Aaliyah was sobbing openly in the gallery. I pressed my hand to my mouth, the tears I had held back for a decade finally falling freely, washing away the bitter exhaustion. Judge Mason cleared his throat. It sounded thick with emotion. He picked up his gavel. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a petition so thoroughly built on fraud, malice, and maternal greed," Judge Mason declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Maya Vance Dawson, your petition for custody is denied with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, the temporary guardianship currently held by Janica Vance is hereby converted into permanent, irrevocable legal custody and sole financial conservatorship over the minors and their respective trusts." Maya let out a wail, but the judge wasn't finished. "Mrs. Dawson, you have utilized this court to perpetrate a fraud, submitting deceptive medical records and committing perjury on the stand. I am directing the court clerk to forward a full transcript of today's proceedings to the district attorney's office with a strong recommendation to investigate you for felony perjury and attempted extortion. You are ordered to have 0 contact with Janica Vance or the minor children. If you come within 500 feet of them, you will be arrested." The gavel slammed down. The sharp crack sounded like a gunshot, echoing off the marble walls, signaling the absolute and final destruction of Maya's horrific plan. "Court is adjourned." As the bailiff moved to escort a screaming, devastated Maya out of the room, David Chen turned to me. He looked exhausted, but he had a brilliant, triumphant smile on his face. He extended his hand. I didn't shake it. I pulled the young lawyer into a tight, fierce hug. "Thank you," I whispered into his shoulder. "Thank you for saving my family." I walked out of the courtroom with my arms wrapped around Marcus and Aaliyah. The Atlanta sun hit my face as we pushed through the heavy doors. For the first time in 13 years, the phantom shadow of my daughter was gone. We had won. The millions were safe, the children were safe, and my name was cleared. But as we walked to the car, I felt a strange, cold prickle on the back of my neck. I had pushed a desperate, greedy, and unstable woman completely into a corner. Maya had just lost her husband, her case, and any hope of saving herself from financial ruin. She was facing potential jail time. She had absolutely nothing left to lose. And as I would soon find out, a mother fighting for money is dangerous. But a narcissist who has been humiliated and backed into a corner is lethal. For 2 weeks after the trial, the air in our house felt lighter than it had in over a decade. The heavy, suffocating dread that had lived in my chest was finally gone. Judge Mason had signed the permanent custody orders, sealing the trust fund and my guardianship in ironclad legal ink. Marcus was busy planning a modest barbecue for his 21st birthday. Aaliyah was buried in college applications, her laughter ringing through the hallways again. But as I stood at this kitchen sink one gloomy Tuesday afternoon, watching the gray Atlanta sky threaten to pour, the hairs on my arms stood up. A mother knows. Even when the paperwork is signed and the gavel has fallen, a mother knows when the danger hasn't truly passed. Maya had lost everything in that courtroom. Tyrone had filed for divorce and kicked her out the very next day. Sterling's law firm had dropped her and was likely suing her for the costs of their fraudulent case. And the district attorney was breathing down her neck for perjury. She was a woman drowning in a storm of her own making, and drowning people will grab onto anything, or anyone, to keep from going under. At 4:15 p.m., my phone vibrated on the counter. It was a text from Nia. "Nana, I'm scared. Mom is here at the bandroom parking lot. She said you were in a car crash and she needs to take me to Grady Hospital right now. Is it true?" The ceramic plate I was washing slipped from my soapy hands and shattered against the bottom of the sink. "Do not get in the car. I am perfectly fine. Lock yourself in the bandroom. I am calling the police and I am on my way." I typed the message with shaking thumbs and hit send. A second later, my phone pinged with a reply. But it wasn't from Nia. "If you call the cops, you'll never see her again. Come to the overflow lot behind the football bleachers. Come alone. Bring the trust conservatorship papers and a pen." The blood in my veins turned to ice. Maya hadn't just bypassed the restraining order. She had cornered my youngest grandchild. I didn't call 911. Not yet. As a black woman raising children in America, I knew the terrifying calculus of an armed, erratic person and a terrified teenager in a dark parking lot surrounded by police sirens. If I called the cops now, Maya might panic. Someone could get shot. I had to de-escalate this myself. I had to get my baby girl out of the line of fire. I grabbed my car keys, ran to my old sedan, and drove toward the high school like a woman possessed. The rain began to fall in heavy, angry sheets, slapping against my windshield. I prayed the whole way, not a quiet, polite prayer, but the desperate, roaring prayer of a matriarch going into battle. I whipped into the back entrance of the high school. The overflow parking lot behind the bleachers was isolated, bordered by a dense line of Georgia pines. There, idling in the pouring rain, was a beat-up silver Nissan. I slammed my car into park, deliberately blocking the exit aisle so the Nissan couldn't leave. I stepped out into the freezing downpour. Through the rain-streaked windshield of the Nissan, I saw them. Nia was in the passenger seat, pressed hard against the door, her face buried in her hands, weeping in absolute terror. In the driver's seat sat Maya. She looked unhinged. Her hair was matted to her face, her eyes wild and bloodshot. She had one hand gripping the steering wheel and the other holding something silver and sharp against the center console. A box cutter. I didn't hesitate. I didn't cower. I walked straight up to the driver's side window and slammed the flat of my palm against the glass. "Unlock this door, Maya!" I roared, my voice cutting through the sound of the rain. Maya flinched, but she rolled the window down exactly 2 inches. "Did you bring the papers?" she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Sign the transfer, Mom. I swear to God I'll drive out of this state right now. I have nothing left. They're taking everything from me." "You did this to yourself," I yelled back, stepping closer until my face was inches from the glass. "You lied to the court. You lied to your husband. You are not taking my granddaughter down with you. She's my daughter, Maya shrieked, waving the box cutter wildly. Naya screamed and curled into a tighter ball. I gave birth to her. The money belongs to me. If I don't get out of Atlanta, they're going to put me in a cage. I looked at the silver blade trembling in her hand. A wave of profound, suffocating sorrow washed over me, immediately followed by a surge of absolute, unyielding power. There were no lawyers here, no judges, no polished oak tables to hide behind. This was just a mother and the child who had lost her way. "Put the knife down, Maya," I said. My voice dropped. It wasn't a yell anymore. It was the low, dangerous, bone-deep tone of a mother who had reached her absolute limit. It was the voice that had stopped her in her tracks when she was a rebellious teenager. "No! I need the money. I said put it down," I commanded, my voice echoing off the metal bleachers. Maya froze. Her chest heaved. "Look at you," I said, the rain soaking through my church clothes, my eyes locked onto hers with a fierce, unwavering intensity. "Look at what you have become. You think you're a monster? You think holding a knife makes you powerful? It doesn't. It makes you a coward. You were a coward 13 years ago when you left them on my porch because motherhood was too hard. And you're a coward today, holding a terrified 16-year-old girl hostage because you don't want to face the consequences of your own actions." Maya's hand began to shake violently. The box cutter wavered. "You want to kill somebody?" I challenged, stepping back and throwing my arms wide open in the rain. "Then come out here and kill me. Come on. Step out of that car and cut me down. Because that is the only way you are driving out of this parking lot with that child. You will have to drive over my dead body." "Mom, stop," Maya sobbed, her tough exterior finally fracturing. "No, you stop," I fired back. "You have broken this family's heart for the last time. You want to know why you lost the case? Why Tyrone left you? Because you love the high, the money, and the victim routine more than you ever loved your own flesh and blood. You are broken, Maya, and neither I nor this child can fix you." Maya stared at me. The manic, desperate energy in her eyes suddenly shattered, replaced by an abyss of realizing exactly what she had done. She looked over at Naya, who was shaking uncontrollably, hyperventilating. For the first time in 13 years, I saw my daughter actually look at her child. Not as a paycheck, not as a pawn, but as a human being she was traumatizing. Maya dropped the box cutter. It clattered into the cup holder. She hit the unlock button on the doors, buried her face in the steering wheel, and let out a guttural, agonizing scream of pure grief. I ripped the passenger door open. Naya practically fell out of the car and into my arms. I pulled her tight against my chest, wrapping my coat around her shivering shoulders. "I got you, baby," I whispered, kissing the top of her head. "Nana's got you. It's over." Behind us, red and blue lights began to flash against the rain. The school's security officer had noticed my car blocking the exit and called the precinct. 2 police cruisers pulled into the lot, officers stepping out with their hands on their holsters. I held Nia with one arm and raised my other hand toward the officers. "It's over," I called out to them. "Nobody is hurt. She's unarmed." The officers approached the Nissan. Maya didn't fight them. She didn't argue. She stepped out of his car slowly, her hands raised, the rain washing away the last traces of the makeup she had worn to court. As they handcuffed her and guided her toward the cruiser, she turned her head and looked back at me. There was no anger left in her eyes, only a profound, devastating emptiness. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered into the rain. I stood in the parking lot, holding the granddaughter she had abandoned, and watched the police car drive away. The storm was finally breaking. 6 months later, the air was crisp with the arrival of autumn. Our backyard was strung with warm yellow fairy lights, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. Marcus was standing by the grill, flipping burgers and laughing loudly with a group of his college friends. He was 21 now. A man. Aaliyah was sitting on the patio, proudly wearing a sweatshirt from the university she would be attending in the spring. Nia was sitting next to her, strumming her guitar, the trauma of the parking lot slowly fading into a bad memory, healed by therapy and the relentless safety of our home. The trust fund had officially unlocked. Marcus had sat down with David Chen and a financial advisor, moving the funds into secure investments for his sisters. But the very first thing he had done with his share was march down to the bank and pay off the remaining balance of my mortgage. "You bought us our lives, Nana," he had told me, handing me the zero balance statement. Now nobody can ever take your home." I watched them from the kitchen window, sipping a cup of hot tea, a deep, abiding peace settling into my bones. There had been a plea deal. Because Maya had dropped the weapon and surrendered, and because David Chen and I had advocated for a mental health diversion rather than maximum prison time, Maya was sentenced to 3 years in a secure, state-mandated psychiatric and rehabilitation facility. She was diagnosed with severe borderline personality disorder and substance relapse. I didn't hate her. I don't think a mother can ever truly hate her child, no matter how much poison they bring into the world. But I knew the boundaries now. I knew that love didn't mean allowing yourself to be destroyed. Every other Sunday, I packed a Tupperware container of my baked mac and cheese and drove 2 hours upstate to the facility. We sat in the visitor's lounge across from a plastic table. We didn't talk about the kids. The restraining order was still in full effect, and Maya knew better than to ask. We talked about the weather. We talked about her group therapy. I brought her clean socks and her favorite magazines. "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" she asked me during my last visit, her voice timid, lacking all the grandiosity she once possessed. "I don't know, Maya," I answered honestly. "Forgiveness isn't a right you demand. It's a gift they might give you when you prove you're a safe person to be around. And that might take the rest of your life." She had nodded, tears silently tracking down her face, finally accepting the weight of the truth. I stepped out onto the back porch, the screen door clapping shut behind me. Marcus looked up from the grill and smiled, a bright, handsome smile that looked so much like his father's. Aaliyah waved me over to the patio chairs, and Nia began playing the opening chords of my favorite gospel hymn. I sat down in the center of my family. Sometimes the world tries to tell you that biology is destiny, that the blood in your veins dictates who you belong to. But sitting under those fairy lights, looking at the 3 incredible human beings I had raised from the ashes of a broken promise, I knew the real truth. Being a mother isn't just about giving birth. It's about staying. It's about walking into the freezing rain when everyone else runs away. It's about standing between the people you love and the monsters trying to take them, even if the monster has your own eyes. I was Janica Vance. I was 64 years old. I was a nurse, a janitor, a survivor. But most importantly, I was their mother. And I always would be. Time is a funny thing. When you are in the middle of a storm, a single minute can feel like a lifetime. But when the skies finally clear and you are simply living, truly living, the years slip through your fingers like warm sand. 5 years had passed since the afternoon in the rain-soaked parking lot. 5 years since the gavel fell and Judge Mason permanently sealed my family's safety. I was 69 years old now. The gray in my hair had fully taken over, replacing the dark strands with a crown of silver. My knees still ached, perhaps a little more in the winter months. But my heart? My heart was lighter than it had been since I was a young woman. Marcus was 26. He had graduated with a degree in civil engineering, secured a job at a prestigious firm downtown, and was already talking about putting a ring on his girlfriend's finger. Aaliyah, at 23, was in her second year of a master's program in social work. She wanted to reform the very foster care systems that had almost torn our family apart. And Nia, my sweet, quiet Nia, was 21. She was a junior in college, majoring in music therapy, using her guitar to help children process trauma. The trust fund money had served its purpose. It paid for their educations, gave them a safety net, and allowed them to step into adulthood without the crushing weight of financial anxiety. But as October rolled around, bringing with it the crisp autumn breeze that swept through the streets of Atlanta, a different kind of weight settled over our household. The 5-year restraining order against Maya was set to expire. For half a decade, the law had been an invisible fortress around my grandchildren. Maya had served her 3 years in the state psychiatric and rehabilitation facility, and for the past 2 years, she had been living in a halfway house on the outskirts of the city, working as a cashier at a local grocery store. I had kept tabs on her from a distance, mostly through David Chen, who had become a trusted family friend. By all accounts, Maya had stayed clean. She had attended her mandatory NA meetings. She hadn't been arrested. But staying out of trouble and being a mother were 2 entirely different universes. On a brisk Tuesday morning, exactly 3 days after the restraining order legally dissolved, I walked out to the mailbox. Nestled between a light bill and a grocery flyer was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It wasn't addressed to me. The handwriting was neat, careful, and terrifyingly familiar. It was addressed to Marcus, Aaliyah, and Nia Vance. I stood at the end of the driveway, the cold wind whipping my cardigan around my shoulders, staring at that envelope. 13 years ago, I would have hidden it. I would have burned it to protect them from the pain she always brought with her. When they were children, I was their shield. But they weren't children anymore. They were adults. And part of raising adults meant knowing when to lower the shield and let them face the world on their own. That evening, I called a family meeting. The kids gathered around the dining room table. I placed the unopened envelope right in the center, next to a vase of fresh sunflowers. The room went dead silent. Marcus recognized the handwriting immediately. His jaw clenched. Aaliyah crossed her arms over her chest, leaning back in her chair. Nia reached out and held my hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "The restraining order expired on Friday," I said, my voice steady, calm, and stripped of any pressure. "This arrived today. I haven't opened it. I haven't looked at it. It belongs to the three of you." Marcus stared at the envelope as if it were a live grenade. "Did she ask you for permission to send this, Nana?" "No," I replied truthfully, "but legally she doesn't have to anymore. And morally she wrote to you, not me." "I don't want to read it," Nia said quickly, her voice tight. The trauma of the parking lot was still a scar, even if it had faded. "Throw it away, Marcus." "Wait," Aaliyah intervened gently. "We're adults, Nia. We can't just pretend she doesn't exist out there. Let's just see what she has to say. If it's another threat, we take it straight to David Chen and file for a permanent extension of the order." Marcus nodded slowly. He picked up a butter knife from the table and sliced the envelope open. Inside were 3 separate handwritten letters and 1 main page. He unfolded the main page and began to read aloud. "Marcus, Aaliyah, Nia. I know seeing my handwriting might make you angry or scared. I don't blame you. I am not writing this to ask for money. I am not writing this to ask for custody or favors or to pretend that the last almost 20 years didn't happen. I have been sober for 5 years. I have a job. I have a tiny apartment. But the only thing I don't have is peace, because I know the damage I caused you. I am writing to ask for exactly 1 hour of your time. In public. At a coffee shop of your choosing. I just want to look you in the eyes and apologize properly. If you say no, I will never contact you again. I promise. Maya." Marcus stopped reading. He set the paper down. The silence in the dining room was thick, heavy with the ghosts of our past. "What do you think, Nana?" Aaliyah asked, looking over at me, seeking the guidance I had always provided. I took a deep breath. "I think that this is the ultimate test of everything I've taught you. I raised you to be strong, to have boundaries, and to know your worth. If you don't want to see her, you owe her absolutely nothing. But if you need closure, if you need to look her in the eye and say your piece, then you go. But you go together, and you go on your terms. This is your choice, not mine." They debated for 2 hours. Nia was resolute. She was not ready. She didn't want to see Maya, and she felt no guilt about it. Marcus and Aaliyah, however, felt a different pull. They didn't want a relationship, but they wanted to see for themselves if the monster under their bed had truly lost her teeth. They agreed to meet her. The following Saturday, the skies over Atlanta were clear and bright. Marcus and Aaliyah chose a busy, well-lit Starbucks in a crowded outdoor shopping center. It was neutral ground, surrounded by people, impossible for a scene to unfold without witnesses. I didn't go with them. I stayed home with Nia. We baked a peach cobbler, but neither of us could really focus on the recipe. My heart was in my throat the entire afternoon. Letting them walk into a room with the woman who had broken them felt like sending soldiers off to war, but I had to trust the armor I had built for them. When Marcus and Aaliyah finally returned home 3 hours later, the sun was beginning to set. I met them at the front door, wiping flour from my hands. "Well?" I asked, searching their faces. They didn't look traumatized. They didn't look broken. If anything, they looked incredibly tired, but deeply at peace. They sat me down in the living room and told me everything. Maya had arrived 15 minutes early. She looked much older, Aaliyah told me. The flashy, manipulative energy she had carried in the courtroom 5 years ago was entirely gone. She wore a simple uniform from the grocery store where she worked. She looked tired, humble, and small. "She didn't try to hug us," Marcus said, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "She just sat across from us, and she cried. but not the fake, loud crying she did for the judge. It was quiet. "What did she say?" Naya asked softly from the armchair. "She took accountability," Aaliyah answered, a sense of quiet wonder in her voice. She didn't blame her addiction. She didn't blame Tyrone. She didn't even try to blame Nana this time. She just looked at us and said, "I was selfish, I was a coward, and I traded the best things in my life because I was weak. You didn't deserve it, and Nana didn't deserve to carry my burden." I felt a lump rise in my throat. 13 years of fighting, 5 years of court battles and restraining orders, and finally, the truth had been spoken, not to a judge, but to the children who needed to hear it. "Did she ask to come back into your lives?" I asked cautiously. Marcus shook his head. "She asked if she could send an email once or twice a year, just to know we were alive and okay. I told her yes, but I also laid down the law. I told her she is not our mother. I told her that title belongs to you, Nana, and it always will. I told her we aren't going to have Thanksgiving dinners together, and she's not going to be sitting in the front row at any weddings." "How did she take it?" Nia asked. "She nodded," Marcus said softly. "She said she understood. She said she didn't earn the right to be a mother. She just wanted the grace to be a distant acquaintance who wishes us well." Aaliyah reached over and took my hand. "It was strange, Nana, seeing her sitting there. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt pity. She missed out on everything. She missed my graduation. She missed Marcus becoming a man. She missed Nia's music. She's living in a tiny room, ringing up groceries, completely alone. Her punishment isn't jail. Her punishment is having to wake up every day and realize exactly what she threw away." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but they were tears of profound relief. My grandchildren had faced the source of their deepest trauma, and they hadn't broken. They had looked Maya in the eye, accepted her apology, and firmly, politely, kept the door closed. They had protected their peace. That night, after the house was quiet and the kids had gone to their rooms, I walked out to the back porch. The air was cool, the crickets humming their familiar southern lullaby. For nearly 20 years, my entire identity had been wrapped up in being the shield, the warrior grandmother, the woman who fought the courts, worked the midnight shifts, and stood in front of a knife to protect her babies. But as I looked up at the stars, I realized my war was finally, truly over. I had won, not just because I kept Maya from stealing their trust fund, not just because I won permanent custody in a court of law. I had won because I raised 3 human beings who were capable of immense empathy, but who also possessed unbreakable boundaries. I had raised adults who knew the difference between offering forgiveness and allowing abuse. A few weeks later, I received a letter of my own. It was a single piece of notebook paper slipped under the front door while I was at the grocery store. I recognized Maya's handwriting immediately. "Mom, they grew up so beautiful. They are strong and smart, and they carry themselves with so much dignity. I know I don't have the right to say this, but I am so incredibly proud of them. But mostly, I am writing this to thank you. I hated you for a long time because you wouldn't let me get away with my lies. You forced me to hit rock bottom, but sitting across from Marcus and Aaliyah, I realized that you did the one thing I was completely incapable of doing. You saved my children, even from me. I will leave them alone now. I will respect their boundaries. I am going to try to build a quiet life and try to be a person who doesn't cause pain anymore. Thank you, Mom, for being the mother to them that I couldn't be." Maya. I stood in the hallway, holding the letter. I didn't cry. I didn't tear it up. I simply folded it neatly, walked into my bedroom, and placed it inside my jewelry box. I didn't need to write back. Some chapters are meant to be closed quietly. Tomorrow, Marcus was coming over to fix the squeaky hinge on the front door. Aaliyah was bringing her new boyfriend over for dinner, and Nia had a solo in the university's winter concert next week. Life was moving forward, bright and unburdened. I am Janica Vance. I am a Black woman, a grandmother, and a mother who went to the ends of the earth to protect her own. And if I had to do it all over again, every double shift, every tear, every terrifying moment in that courtroom, I would do it in a heartbeat. Because love isn't just a feeling. Love is an action. Love is staying. And as the morning sun broke over the horizon, casting a warm golden glow through the windows of my living room, I knew that the love I had planted in this house would outlive us all.